Hello, everyone. This is Dr. J. I am your podcast host for the CP podcast. And with me today, I have Dr. Greg Pennington. Dr. Greg Pennington, would you like to say anything before we hop in?
I am so glad to be here, and especially here with you, Dr. J. So looking forward to whatever you're going to pull out of me.
Yes, hopefully some good things. So I have brought Dr. Pennington on today because we are in these first few series of the podcast, we're going to just cover some basic foundational things about what is consulting psychology. Even though we have many of us who have been doing consulting psychology for years, it's never too late to just give a sort of refresher. So today, Dr. Pennington is kind of going to take us through, how do you know that consulting as a psychologist is for you? And I know that in this past APA conference, we were able to talk with many different psychologists from many walks of APA and the field of psychology. And they just were all interested in consulting in their own field. So we just want to touch on that today and see how do we know that it's right for us or right for you. So Dr. Greg Pennington, he is the business owner of Pennpoint Consulting, right, Dr. Pennington?
Yes, that's it.
And you do consulting there. Tell us just a little bit about your business and, use psychology.
Sure. I mean, in many ways, I kind of go this model of what most people talk about consulting psychology, that doing the application of psychology to individuals, to teams, to organizations, and then more and more discussion around the application to systems. So one of the things I do with Pennpoint Consulting is the focus on accelerating and elevating leadership effectiveness. That turns out to be three different areas of focus. One is the individual leader in most cases, so the executive coaching space. Somehow or another, increasing and accelerating the development of leadership potential, like leadership development programs for high potentials, but also targeted leadership development programs for women in a given industry, targeted development on a population of Blacks and other people of color. And then the third bucket is working with intact teams to get them to be much more effective or high performing over time. And then throughout all of that it's always been this lens around diversity, equity, and inclusion. How does the organization, individual, team, or organization fully utilize all their resources?
Okay, thank you. So from what I hear from you is that you have sort of like your own methodology on how you're approaching consulting using your background. And I really love how you're, weaving in and out of, you have women, you have other people of color, you have Black people, and I'm sure other minority groups that you're working with as far as Pennpoint Consulting goes. But I'm just curious, because surely you didn't come to this overnight. How did you get started in this field to come to this point in your career, and how you approach consulting using psychology?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's necessarily my own model, because I think there's so many things that get to be repetitive or predictable. And so I do think, I'm answering both of those questions together. I came to this, if I thought about the earliest moment in hindsight, I thought I was doing something like consulting psychology. It would be one of those instances in elementary school, certainly by middle school, when somebody said, "Can I just talk to you for a moment? I got this problem." And then they may have been way up here with their energy level. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't know what to say or do. So I just asked a question like, "So really?" Or when did that happen? And how did you do this? And so I just listened. And then afterwards, somebody said, "Well, thanks for listening to me." So that was, in hindsight, would be an early indicator that there's something that one of those core skill sets, capabilities, and I would say from the standpoint of fit for myself, some satisfaction from being able to listen to someone and that being of value, being able to give them some different perspective. Have you thought about this, or what about that? Seeing that as valuable. Now, more concretely, I was, and I won't tell the whole story, but if I started in college, I was always interested in psychology, understanding what made people tick. I was also fairly early on interested in how do people get better, not from a below level of functioning, but how would the average person get better and closer to fully utilizing all their capabilities. So that was my biggest kind of appreciation of psychology. And I started focusing in on all my classes were in the applied area, like motivation, and that pulled through from my dissertation around power motivation or influence. I went to graduate school because I wanted to be called Dr. Pennington at some point. And back then, if someone said psychologist, PhD, they, and particularly applied, they thought of it as a clinical psychology degree. So that's my degree. My professor during graduate school said, "What are you doing here? Because you clearly don't want to do, the usual clinical stuff." So I was still doing the motivation. I was still trying to do some educational programs. I was still trying to do some consulting around how do you manage crisis in this one of the local law enforcement organizations. So I was doing stuff that I would have said then was applied psychology. And
Okay.
somewhere from undergraduate to graduate school, probably more undergraduate, I just got enamored with um, the former APA president, I'm blocking on his name now, who said, we need to give psychology away. So that notion of if it works, find a place to apply it has been driving all of this. Now I'll give a couple other pieces so I went from graduate school thinking, okay, how do I use this with leaders and in organizations? So after my internship, which was at a federal prison, and I went there because I got to work with teams, intact teams, easily accessible because that was part of their treatment plan. But I went from there and talked my way into being the chief human resources officer for savings and loan. Relatively small organization at the time, but that plunged me into policies, procedures, interviews, crafting job descriptions, a little bit about leadership development programs and supervisory programs. And I also at that point saw how RHR, Roy Hibbler and Replogle, was doing this stuff at the senior level. This all predates calling it executive coaching. It was really much more organizational consulting, leadership consulting. Mm-hmm. So I had a model, which was at arguably clearly fashioned more around what RHR was doing then and now. And that's what pulled me even more into what I've been doing. And so I started working with RHR and was there for many years on 2 different stints. In between that was working for a diversity firm, J. Howard and Associates. They had been primarily focused on training, and I came in to help develop this consulting group where we did needs assessments as an example. So then back to RHR, and then I went to work for Hay Group because all of that early stuff around power motivation and applied psychology from Dave McClellan got manifested in his consulting group called Hay Group. So emotional intelligence. So one little claim from me on emotional intelligence is that Daniel Goleman's book came out, big hit. They had this idea of making it more commercial and accessible to others. We lent someone from my organization to Daniel Goleman to help commercialize what now people see as that emotional intelligence, product. And then I worked internal for a utility company. I worked internal for a global manufacturing, automotive, building efficiency company around succession planning. And then I got reorganized out and started Pennpoint Consulting in 2012.
Very nice. So all of that, of course, sounds amazing. I mean, just your journey from in grade school where kids were just coming up and saying, can I just talk to you about this? All the way to Pennpoint Consulting, with the RHR story, with your DNI story, and then this historical piece of emotional intelligence. We kind of, since we don't really talk a whole lot about history like that, we don't realize who's connected to things like that. So having heard your story, how can some of our audience that's listening right now, how can they know it's right for them? Like for you, it was, since grade school, but what are some things they can kind of tune into to know that consulting is right for them as a psychologist?
Yeah, and honestly, I think it starts with having some clarity about, this may sound trite, but I really mean it, but having some clarity about what's your personal mission. What do I want to do? What impact I want to have? And that was more in my head for many years. Finally, I put it in print. But I think everyone should start with why are you here? What are you trying to do? And that gives you this broad umbrella. And after that, I mean, and some another from the consulting standpoint, I would imagine it has to be some version of I genuinely want to help others. Now, whether that's help others individually in teams or in organizations, that's more of a goodness of fit for you. But I would say that drive that I want to be of help to others, and then I think if you want to be of help in a way that is not really preset or pre-chartered, because I don't know when I talk with people exactly what we're going to do. I have an idea. So there's something about the comfort level with the unfolding of the person and unfolding of the situation, and the ambiguity of what's happening along there, along with the clarity of, I can see people tell me, if people tell you that there's something about talking with you that helps me get some clarity about what I'm doing, or some clarity about where I want to go, or some clarity about how to make it happen, then that's the stuff that starts saying, I can do something that might be called, consulting psychology. There's a piece of it, and part of the reason why I was hesitating in some of those is that one of the readings that really helped me frame what I'm about to say is Peter Block's stuff on flawless consulting, because he talks about versions of consulting that are expert, pair of hands, and then true partner. So there's some of you out there who might say, yeah, I like to help people, but I want to be the one in charge. So that expert piece, if you want to find out what does it take to successfully orchestrate a merger based on my experience, based on the research that I've done, that is a version of consulting. And that's what I'm saying. It's partly, do you want to help? And are you clear about that? How do you want to do it? I want to tell you from my expertise what to do. And that's satisfying for you to do that, then maybe that version of consulting psychology is right for you. I want to be a pair of hands. You tell me what you need, and then I can go develop this implicit bias training program. That works for some as well. And then that third one about the partnering, you said you want team building. Why do you want team building? What are you trying to get out of it? That's what I mean is that uncharted area. And so I think so I'm gonna give you some other concrete ones about knowing it, which might sound a little off the track or anticipated one. I wasn't necessarily a great actor, but I enjoyed acting. I enjoyed being on the stage, but more importantly, I enjoyed trying to figure out what's the motivation of this character? How am I supposed to pull this off?
Right.
How would it really is a fascinating way of honing your empathy, honing your emotional intelligence. So I think there are places along the way where someone says, if my consulting is going to be trying to understand where the person is coming from, you might want to test yourself and say, where else am I doing this? Am I the one who goes into a room without an agenda and I'm sitting around thinking, oh, wonder what she was doing just before she got here. Wonder what he was thinking just then. Wonder what, if I know I spent a lot of my time trying to absorb this data around me, and I like when the patterns stick together and I like when they fall apart to start again, I think that's one of those early indicators of maybe consulting will be, something that works for you. I think on the flip side is if you really, 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 this is for the clinicians out there, if you really, really, really need to be the person with all the answers, then most of consulting isn't for you. And we can delve into that a little bit more. But there's something about the partnering piece when I think about blocks 3 that I would say is a ways of you saying, oh, I can reconnect with that. And if I find something like consulting psychology as a vehicle to allow me to keep helping others, even when neither one of us knows exactly what we're going to do, then that's a real hook in there.
Mm-hmm. And the number one thing that I hear out of all of that is just getting clarity on why we want to do it in the first place, and just doubling down on, what makes us interested in this field, number one, and what are some things that we're already doing. I really love the acting analogy, looking at why does this character exist? What is the purpose of this character? And then even thinking, do I like to connect these dots? As you said, looking in a room, do I like to connect like why this person is doing this and why this person is doing that? Looking at those patterns, because that's one thing that I love. I love to connect patterns. Sometimes, but
yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. So, Dr. Pennington, is there anything you would like to leave our audience with, like for those who are kind of on the fence, or who just need that extra push into this field? What would you say to them in our last few minutes?
I would say, find somewhere to pause and see how you are already doing consulting psychology. And if you can answer that, then you're on the right path. You're clearly on the path. And by that, I mean, if I am doing individual therapy and I find myself wondering, what is it like for this person to go home? And so maybe I need to think a little bit about their family situation. And then what is it like for them in this broader? That's what I mean by those adjacencies. Mm-hmm. If you can sit and say that, how close am I already to consulting psychology, helping people understand situations and solve situations, then it just gives you that same encouragement because it's going to give you an example of I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing right now. Am I willing to take a little bit more discomfort to call in the rest of the family? So that willingness to do it is an early indicator and an early test for yourself that it's not as though I'm going to stop completely doing what I'm doing now and suddenly start doing consulting psychology. I would really leave people with thinking that if you're not already beginning to do it, then maybe you're not going to do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you heard it here from Dr. Pennington himself on the CP podcast. Dr. Pennington, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to more of these conversations, in the future, because I'm sure many clinicians have a ton of more questions for you. And also, I just want to let everyone know we will be having more of these DE&I discussions. I know Dr. Pennington alluded to some of those. So please stay tuned to that. And we just want to thank you for joining us today. So these
my pleasure.
All right. Bye.
Be safe.